بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سورة مزمل أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها المزمل قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا إنا سنلقي عليك قولا ثقيلا إن ناشئة الليل هي أشد وطئا وأقوم قيلا إن لك في النهار سبحا طويلا واذكر اسم ربك وتبتل إليه تبتيلا رب المشرق والمغرب لا إله إلا هو فاتخذه وكيلا واصبر على ما يقولون واهجرهم هجرا جميلا وذرني والمكذبين أولي النعمة ومهلهم قليلا إن لدينا أنكالا وجحيما وطعاما ذا غصة وعذابا أليما يوم ترجف الأرض والجبال وكانت الجبال كثيبا مهيلا إنا أرسلنا إليكم رسولا شهادا عليكم كما أرسلنا إلى فرعون رسولا فعصى فرعون الرسول فأخذناه أخذا وبيلا فكيف تتقون إن كفرتم يوما يجعل الولدان شيبا السماء منفطر به كان وعده مفعولا إن هذه تذكرة فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا إن ربك يعلم أنك تقوم أدنى من ثلثي الليل ونصفه وثلثه وطائفة من الذين معك والله يقدر الليل والنهار علم أن لن تحصوه فتاب عليكم فاقرؤوا ما تيسر من القرآن علم أن سيكون منكم مرضى وآخرون يضربون في الأرض يبتغون من فضل الله وآخرون يقاتلون في سبيل الله فاقرؤوا ما تيسر منه وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا وما تقدموا لأنفسكم من خير تجدوه عند الله هو خيرا وأعظم أجرا واستغفروا الله إن الله غفور رحيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صدق رسول
الله صل على محمد
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وأن عليا ولي الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد سميع له لمن حمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم سميع له لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف الله أكبر بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم لا إله إلا الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل فرجهم. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله. استغفر الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل فرجهم. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد آل محمد عجل فرجهم. لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه.
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. بنت علی نے مجھ کو چادر بنا لیا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. کرتے ہیں رشک مجھ پر کوثر کے بھی کنارے. زینب کے سر میں نے 2 سال ہے گزارے. میرا ہر ایک ذرہ ہر ظلم کا گواہ ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. اکبر جوان قاسم غازی سے چاند تارے. زین العبان میری آغوش میں اتارے. یعنی لہو نبی کا مجھ میں ملا ہوا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. روتی ہوں یاد کر کے وہ بے کسی کا منظر. مولا چھپا رہے تھے مجھ میں وہ لاش اصغر. اس دن سے آج تک نہ مجھ کو سکون ملا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. شہدائے کربلا کے زخموں کو میں نے چوما. زہرا کی بیٹیوں کے قدموں کو میں نے چوما. اس واسطے ہی میری تاثیر میں شفا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. اکبر کی لاش پر جب شبیر جا رہے تھے، اٹھتے تھے بیٹھتے تھے اور لڑکھڑا رہے تھے. منظر وہ ابھی میری آنکھوں میں پھر رہا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. اے زائرین مولا چلنا یہاں سنبھل کر. قرآن فاطمہ کا بکھرا ہوا ہے مجھ پر. نہ جانے کس جگہ پر کس کا لہو گرا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے. بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sayyid Hassan Rizvi, respected elders, dearest brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jamia wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumin listed on the screen, as well as all other marhumin. Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha. Dua Shri is requested for all those in need here and elsewhere, as well as those listed on the screen. Let us recite together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. Ya Allah. Let us now invite Sayyid Hassan Rizvi to please come forward for tonight's majlis. By Muhammad wa Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight we commemorate the Shahadat of the two sons of Muslim ibn Aqil alayhi salam on the 22nd of Dhul Hijjah. There are different reports regarding what took place. Some said that he had accompanied Muslim when he had left Makkah and left towards Kufa. Others say that he was with Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala, and as they were being transported from Karbala towards Kufa, they were able to escape. When they did escape, however, they were captured and then later put in jail. Regardless of the history, when we think about the sons of Muslim ibn Aqil, or the sons of Bibi Zainab, or the son of Imam Hassan, or the children of Imam Hussein, anytime we're thinking about these individuals, normally you don't really find any religions or any faiths or any people really honoring children necessarily. It seems to be something unique within the school of Ahlul Bayt. And especially when it comes to the tragedy of Karbala, that you find these incredible young personalities who are able to manifest these divine qualities. And so normally when we think about these children, a lot of us, especially as parents, our mind goes to the topic of tarbiyah, of child upbringing. We're thinking, how could we have kids like Ibrahim and Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Aqil? How could we have kids like Qasim ibn al-Hassan? How can we have kids like On and Muhammad ibn Zainab? Like, how do we get these kind of children? What do we have to do to raise these sorts of children? An issue that we find though is when we look in the Quran, there's obviously a lot of ayat which talk about the way that we should raise our children and how we should respect them. When we look in the riwayat, we have sections dedicated to how we express and show our love, especially in the first 7 years of a child's life. How they're the masters, they're the sayyids, and that's what we do. We take care of them. At the same time, in the Quran, children have been put and mentioned alongside of wealth and money. And to some, they say it's in a negative sense. And children and wealth together are described as a fitna. So, for example, you see in Surah Al-Anfal, Surah 8, ayat 27 through 28, although right now we'll focus on just 28. There Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. You should know that your amwal, your wealth, your money, and your awlad, your children, they're fitna. وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ عِنْدَهُ أَجْرٌ عَظِيمٌ. And there's a high reward with Allah. And this is mentioned many times in the Quran, that children and wealth are fitna. Now, this might seem a little strange. Like, why are children and wealth mentioned like this? Because we know from other places, as we just mentioned, it's obvious that we are recommended, to get married quickly, to have children, to have a lot of children, to raise them in with these divine names and sifat, using the Ahlul Bayt and their companions as role models. Like, we're taught all this. And we're also taught that being impoverished is not good either. Money by itself is not bad. It's only when it's used for bad things. So it said, so why are children and wealth being described as a fitna over here? Right? What's the sort of reason here? So we're going to go through a discussion about this ayah and some concepts about children acting as a fitna. And for some context, we'll need the ayah right before this as well. So if you look in the ayah right before, meaning it's again Surah Anfal 8, ayah number 27, Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tukhunu Allah wa rasul wa tukhunu amanatikum wa antum ta'lamun. So all those of you with iman, do not do khiyana. Don't betray Allah and the Rasul or betray your amanat, your trusts. When وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ, when you know exactly what the consequences will be, when you know what's going on. So, okay, what does this have to do with the other one? What is this khiyana? Because there seems to be some sort of connection here. Allah is mentioning all of this. Don't do khiyana to Allah, to the Prophet, and to your amanat, when you know better. And then Allah is saying, and also, you should make sure you're aware that your wealth and your children are a fitna. It's like, okay, well, what's sort of the connection here? So the first point we want to bring out is what exactly is the background of this ayah, and what does this actually have to do with the concept of tawbah and forgiveness? Even to this day, if you want to see the living example of this ayah, you can go to Masjid al-Nabawi and you can find a place there which is revealed or connected to these specific ayat. And we'll discuss that in a minute. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So media, if you could bring up the slide. So in Masjid al-Nabawi, in Medina, and you can see it here, hopefully it's clear for you on the slide. There are many different pillars and areas that are marked off. And some of us, obviously, like the Door of Fatima, the Mihrab of Fatima, a lot of these areas are kind of known to us. Some of these pillars, if you see the word ustuana, that means pillar. These different pillars that are there in Masjid al-Nabi, some of them have various types of significance. So the one that we are focused on, that is connected to these ayat, is, if you can see the arrows where they're pointed, is Ustuwanatut Tawbah, the pillar of Tawbah, or also known as the pillar of Abu Lubaba. So this whole episode, these ayat, according to many mufassirin, both Sunni and Shia, have to do with Abu Lubaba and his story. So what happened? Now we're done with the slide now, yeah. So Abu Lubaba was from the tribe of Aus. He became Muslim after the Prophet had made Hijjah. So I think after the Prophet had been in Medina for a few years, then he ended up converting to Islam. And he was a leading member as well, right? So he was one of the higher, more elite members. Around this time, I don't want to go into all the details, but around this time as well is when there was many treaties being made between the Prophet and the Jews around Medina. And, between Medina, outside Medina, right? The various tribes, like Bani Qaynuqa, for example, and Bani Qurayza. And of course, many of you know, in this time, the vast majority of them, if not all of them, all betrayed, right, and went against the alliances that they had made. They had written treaties, but then disobeyed. One of these tribes, Bani Qurayda, after making the treaty with the Prophet, had gone against that. When that happened, now the Prophet had laid siege to their area, to their fort, where they were stationed. And this siege had been being laid now for about 25 days. So at this point, the tribe there, Banu Qurayda, they had reached out to Rasulullah. They said, look, we know that with other tribes, you had allowed them to consult and to find a way out of this siege. We are asking if we can have somebody from amongst you Muslims, one of your companions, your supporters, and you can send him to us so that we can consult with him about what's the best thing to do. And obviously, the Prophet was looking for them to end this, right? He wanted them to surrender. He said, okay, fine. So after some back and forth, they decided they want this person, Abu Lubaba. And the reason was Abu Lubaba, being from the tribe of Aus, actually had a good connection with Banu Qurayda. He had known them from before, so he had a good relationship with them. So it made sense. So Abu Lubaba goes to this tribe, Bani Qurayda, this Jewish tribe. And they begin to discuss that. Now, Bani Qurayda, they had this whole vision in their mind. They knew that basically there's two options. If the siege continues, the Prophet was going to wipe out all of them. If they submit or surrender, they don't know what's going to happen. So they had a plot to try to use and abuse the trust that they have with Abu Lubaba to play to his emotions, to try to get information out of him. So when Abu Lubaba comes, they set up throughout the city women and children, and they kind of make this really, really sad sort of affair, the sad sort of show of things. And they start to describe, oh, it's so difficult for us, and this and that. And so you're a good friend to us, you've always been good to us. You tell us, Abu Lubaba, what should we do? Right? On one hand, if we allow you Muslims to continue, then we'll be wiped out, right, if the siege continues. On the other hand, we could submit and surrender. So is this something that you advise? Should you do that or not? So Abu Lubaba is thinking, and he says that he wants to tell them to surrender. So he tells them, yes, you should surrender. But something comes over him. And the Mufassirin say, and he later describes it himself, is that because of the sight of all the children and the women and what he saw what was happening in the city, it broke his heart a little bit. And it affected him emotionally. He empathized with them. So when he had said to them that, yes, you should surrender, at the same time, he also went like this. Basically giving them a signal that even if you surrender, the Prophet, because you have betrayed and you've shown that you cannot be trusted, he's still going to wipe you out anyway. The Muslims will still wipe out your tribe. So basically he was saying that it doesn't matter what you do, don't just surrender, you might as well just fight till the end, if that's what's going to happen. The minute, Abu Lubaba narrates afterwards, he says, the minute I said that, I realized I did khiyana to Islam and to Rasulullah. And he regretted it immediately. When he made his way back to Medina, he didn't talk to or see anybody. The first place he ran to was where we had just showed you, that pillar within Masjid al-Nabi. At that point, it was just a tree, I believe. So he went there, regretful, remorseful, and tied himself to that tree. And saying, I'm not leaving here. He made a vow, that I'm not leaving here until Allah forgives me. I can't leave here. And then later on, word came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he said, I wish Abu Lubaba just came to me. I would have, since he's remorseful and regretful, I would have just prayed for his forgiveness. But because now he's made a vow, and he wants Allah directly to forgive him, then I can't do anything till Allah says so. So they say for some period of time he was there, he tied himself to this palm tree or pillar that we just showed you in Masjid al-Nabi. His wife and daughter would come during salah time, they would untie him so that he could perform wudu, perform salah, and then they would retie him again. This is how much he stuck and how remorseful he was. Then later on, after some period of time, then the ayah in Surah Tawbah, ayah 102 was revealed. وَآخَرُونَ اعْتَرَفُوا بِذُنُوبِهِمْ. And there are others who have acknowledged their sin. خَلَطُوا عَمَلًا صَالِحًا, that they have mixed their amalan salih. They've mixed their good deeds. وَآخَرَ سَيِّئًا عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَتُوبَ عَلَيْهِمْ. And they've also mixed stuff that was bad, and perhaps Allah will turn to them in forgiveness. Inna Allah ghafurun rahim. Allah is Ghafur Rahim. He's forgiving and merciful. And they say that this ayah came, and when that happened, Jibreel, when he sent this down and told Rasulullah, he said that, look, this is Allah saying, yes, he's done this and now he's forgiven. When the people of Medina came and told Abu Lubaba, he said, look, you've been forgiven. You're done now. You can end this what you've done, being tied to this pillar. He said, I won't do this myself until Rasulullah himself comes and unties me. Right? This is somebody who's so committed, who felt so bad and remorseful for what he had done. So why I mention this? One is, again, just to keep us aware. If we had no idea what the background was here, what actually happened, if you and I were just going through Surah Anfal and these two ayat came, now we could generally understand, okay, don't do khiyanat to the Prophet, to Allah, to the Prophet. Don't do khiyanat in terms of amanat and things that you have trustworthy. Okay, we get that. And then know that kids and wealth are fitna. They don't really seem connected here. You can take a general meaning, but to understand what actually happened there now gives us much more depth and meaning. So what the Mufassirin say is, look, there's two different reasons perhaps why this khiyana took place. One is what we kind of just narrated, and this seems to be the majority opinion, that Abu Lubaba, because of the children, and because he saw the wealth of these quote-unquote innocent people in the tribe of Bani Qurayza was, he felt that was, kind of unjust. It wasn't in reality, obviously, but he felt that, right? And they were playing a trick on him. So this ayah then says, look, be careful because even kids will be used as a fitna against you. So this was one interpretation. There's another interpretation as well, and this ties into other ayat and other incidents that took place. Around the same time, there was an issue between when Rasulullah and the Muslims were in Medina. And as we know, when they made their hijrah, a lot of them left behind family members, some of them left behind their children, and they left behind their property in Mecca. Right? Because they had to leave everything when they made their hijrah. And the Meccans, the Quraysh, the Kuffar, they held it hostage there. And they would trade with it, they would sell it, they wouldn't let anybody trade with those things, right? So they held their property hostage. So in that sense too, what would happen is some individuals in Medina would secretly send information to Abu Sufyan and say, Rasulullah, even though they were good Muslims, they would send letters to Abu Sufyan that, the Prophet is planning to do X, Y, Z. Please just release some of our stuff. Their stuff was being sanctioned. They said, let us have our children back. And then, we'll keep giving you information. Even though these were devout practicing Muslims. These were people who were ready to give their lives for Islam, but their wealth and their children became a fitna for them. It tested them so much, became so much of a trial, that Allah said, let's really see where your iman lies. Let's see if you will do khiyana to Allah, to His Prophet, and to the amanah, to the trust that's been given to you. Now, the next point that we want to mention is, what exactly then is a fitna? If you can recite, a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I think most of us hopefully are aware now that fitna in our own sort of Eastern languages, that we're used to using it in a negative sense, right? Oh, this is a big fitna, or somebody's starting a fitna. We use it to say something bad is happening, right? Somebody's causing trouble. In Arabic, or in the way that it's used in the Quran and even the Hadith, fitna has no positive or negative meaning. If it has anything, it's actually a positive meaning. Fitna, all it means is wasilatul imtihan, that's it. It's an intermediary and a tool to be used for imtihan and to be tested with. That's all. Now, you think about it. Any time that you and I have taken a test, an examination, an evaluation, by default, just by itself, it's not bad or good. How we prepare for it, or how we, the lack of preparation will determine whether it's good for us or bad for us, how we react to it. If you come into a test or an exam or an interview or an eval, having done your stuff properly, knowing what you're doing, then there's no problem there, then you're okay with it. There's no issue. Right? You study for a test, you come in, whatever, it's a test. And in fact, you see it as good. I can't wait to get this test out of the way so I can go on and get my degree or my certification or get my master's or PhD or JD, whatever. Or, I can get you can get extra compensation in certain jobs once you pass certain tests, right? So that's what people, usually they look for this stuff. But yes, if you're not prepped at all, if you're not ready for an evaluation, if you're caught off guard, then yes, then this is now a negative fitna for you. It's a terrible exam because you don't know what you're doing. And all of us who've been in school, the same thing happens. If you've prepared, you come in, it's not a big deal. You're not really stressed out because you prepped. You're like, whatever happens, happens. Especially if it's like open book, right? It's not a big deal. But there's always one friend or somebody there who's just freaked out and stressing out over everything. Like, look, why are you stressed out? If you've come to class, if you've studied, if you know what you're doing, assuming the professor's not like a zalim, whatever, If all that is there, then you shouldn't be freaking out like this. Now, the only reason you could be freaking out and stressed out and anxious is if you didn't pay attention, you didn't study, you didn't read, you don't know what you're doing. In the same way, when we talk about akhirah and we talk about the fitnas in the dunya, there's no reason for us to freak out if we're following and obeying the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. Then there's no issue for us. It doesn't matter what happens outside in the world. If we're prepared for it, then it's fine. And inshallah, once we later on, I think maybe in Muharram, inshallah, when we continue this series of Mahdawiyah, we're going to go into that topic of signs of the Mahdi, which everybody's interested in, right? What about these signs and the chaos and the sun turning this color, all these things? Like, who cares? If you're prepped, it doesn't matter if the sky turns green or blue or purple, who cares? If you're ready, whether the Imam comes right now or he comes 10,000 years from now, it won't matter to you because you're ready to go. If you're not ready, and you still don't even know how to make wudu, or you don't know how to join Jama'at properly, then yeah, you should be freaked out and you should be wondering and you should be scared if the Imam comes now. Because the Imam's not going to come here and say, yeah, let's do a Slido quiz, let me teach you about your fiqh now. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's a wild assumption, but more than likely, he's not going to come and offer an ahkam class, right? He's not here for that. He's like, you had all this time, everything's there, you have it, in the palm of your hands, you have all these apps. You even have a resident alim who's quizzing you on this stuff every single week. I think you should be able to at least understand some of your ahkam right now, right? Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, so, now let's go back to our original point. Allah is saying that your wealth and your children are a fitna. Not that they're negative, in and of themselves, that they just become a test and a measure for our testing. Meaning, if you want to grow spiritually, you can tell through the way that somebody interacts with their wealth and interacts with their children, or even how they think about wealth and how they think about their children. And even bringing in the context, historical context of these ayat, it's not just your own children, it's other people's children too, which is what affected Abu Lubaba. Right? It was the children of the tribe of Bani Qurayza which softened his heart, but in a negative way. So, there's many different ways that Allah has mentioned how children can be a strong imtihan and a strong test for us. So I'll mention maybe a few different ayat, and then we'll quickly try to make it relevant for today. So in Surah Isra, Surah 17, Ayah 64, Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is ayat 63 through 64. So I'm just going to go through 64, but the context is that Allah here is talking to Shaitan. He's telling him to get lost, to get out of here, and then mentioning the different things that Shaitan can do and will do. So in 64 now he continues, and the part that is relevant for us, he says that Shaitan, what? وَشَارِكَهُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَأَوْلَادِ وَعِدْهُمْ. That many things, among the things that Shaitan will do is that he'll become a sharik. He'll become a partner in your wealth and in your children. So imagine now you're, it's usually just mother and father who are the ones who are parenting. Allah is saying that Shaitan has a share amongst your children as well. That he can get involved in the conception and the procreation and the thinking and the upbringing. Everything related to a child, Shaitan has the ability to get involved into this. And how that happens, again, we'll mention maybe a bit later. Then we look at Surah Hadid, ayah number 20. Allah there says, وَتَكَاثُرٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. Another way is that in the dunya, one of the ways that children and wealth specifically can be a cause for us as a fitna is that we'll start competing because of wealth and children and the amounts. Now this point usually was more relevant for the Arabs of that time, right? Because for them it was a competition. How many kids can you have? You have a lot of wives, you have a lot of kids, and you feel like, see, I'm so rich, I'm so powerful, I'm so wealthy. That's why I have all this. It's the same thing that these Al Saud and these types, they still do the same thing, right? Look, I have all these princes and I have all these children. I don't even know how many kids I have. That's the way they speak. They don't know. And then they're able to give every single one of them, these buildings full of exotic cars. And this is a way for them to show off to one another. Like, yeah, it's not a big deal for us. So that mentality is still there. Whether it's for us right now, I would say actually it's changed the other way. Now how that is, inshallah we'll mention in a few minutes. And then I think two more ayat. Next one is in Surah Munafiqun, ayah number 9, where Allah says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu la tulhikum amwalukum wa awladukum an dhikrillah. Mu'mineen, don't let your wealth and your children divert you and push you away and keep you away from dhikrullah. Yeah, children can keep you away from remembering Allah. How is that? Again, we'll mention in a minute. Last ayah is Surah Al Imran, ayah number 10. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna alladhina kafaru lan tughni anhum amwaluhum wa la awladuhum min Allah shay'a wa ulaika hum waqudun nar. The kuffar, those who hide the truth, never will their wealth nor their children ever help them against Allah ever. They are a fuel for the fire. Okay. Now, in regards to all of this, what I want to remind us all is when we're talking about fitna, again, just to remind us, fitna is not something that you and I keep away from. It's not something we say, I don't want to deal with any fitnas in my life. It's not something in and of itself that is negative or positive. It's our reaction to it, which is either negative or positive. And this we see, for example, in Nahj al-Balagha, in the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wassalam. He's reported to have said there, it should be in saying number 93 or 94, لا يقولن أحدكم, none of you should ever say, and he emphasizes never ever say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-fitna. Never say, oh Allah, I am seeking refuge and protection in you from fitnas. He said never ever say that. لأنه, because ليس أحد إلا وهو مشتمل على الفتنة. Because every single person will always be caught up in a fitna. I mean, you have to be caught up and move and continue in your life in some sort of trial or examination. That's the nature of life. ولكن, he's like, however though, من استعاذ فليستعذ من مضلات الفتن. That, however, there is something that you can pray for, isti'adha. I mean, if you want to do a'udhu, like ask Allah to protect you from something, this is the way you do it. You ask Allah, protect me from the mudillat al-fitan. Ask me, say, Allah, protect me from any fitna which will deviate me and keep me away from you. Keep me away from those types of trials and examinations. Or the other way that the Mufassirin explain this hadith is that keep me away from acting in a way or responding in a way to a test or an examination where I'll fail and end up moving away from you. So it's two interpretations. Either you say, keep me away from a fitna which itself can deviate me and keep me away from God, or that help me make sure my response to a fitna is not one that deviates from Allah. Either or. And then Imam Ali there also says, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى يَقُولُ, and then he quotes this ayah we talked about, وَعَلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ fitna, right? This verse in Surah Anfal. So he uses this ayah for the same point. Saying, see, your wealth will always be a fitna. You can't avoid that. Your children will always be a fitna. You cannot avoid that. And it has to be that way. Which means then it's telling us that this can be either a source of our destruction or a source of our growth and ascension. Now, how is that the case? Let's bring some modern examples, inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Quran, Imam Ali, and in general, our Mufassirin saying, don't just say, Allah, don't try me, don't test me. No, you have to be tried and tested to see if we will grow or not. The idea is, Allah, give me strength, give me insight, give me foresight, give me wisdom, give me sabr and patience, give me what I need, give me the tools I need so I can succeed and pass the test. Give me the ability to be prepared. That's what you ask for. Make sure I don't fail these tests. That's how we pray. One of the biggest problems of modern day feminism, this feminism which is inspired by capitalism and corporatism, is that it's one of the examples of this sort of negative ideology of how you respond to quote unquote fitnas, or a test or an examination. If you see that one of the most prevailing ideas in the modern world right now, in the West, is what? Is telling mothers or women specifically, delay marriage, or even if you are married, make sure you delay having kids. Why? Because it's going to interfere with your career growth. It's going to, interfere with your purpose and your greater role in life. Kids are kids, whatever. But, you need to make sure that you, work and you have a place in some corporation, right? That's the idea that they push. That's where you find meaning. Or they go even beyond that. Some of them, they don't just say delay it. They say don't have any altogether. And if you see many of these articles that come out in, a lot of these liberal websites and newspapers, these pundits push the idea, what's the point of kids? And they go on this whole negative rant. The world is so terrible, it's disgusting, and global warming, and this and that. Why would you want to bring a child? They would say, it's oppression to bring a child into such a terrible world. So why bother? Right? This is what many, writers and social thinkers and whatever, this is what they're saying right now. What's the point? So all of these things, their response to a fitna, meaning a test or an examination, an ability to grow, they say, look, don't even bother. Don't even try the test. Leave it alone. Delay it. And their response is, hey, the real test is how can you do for a company? Can you help our stock points or not, right? Can you help GDP growth? Obviously, this is self-serving for them. Is it actually beneficial for families? No, not at all. Obviously, those us we know, for both husband and wife, it's much, much more difficult if you do delay to try to have kids later on. It's much, much more difficult. Forget that. Even getting married that much later in life is much more difficult. Right? There's a reason why we're recommended to get married earlier. Right? It's easier in that sense. It'll prevent from a lot of sins. But, trust me, and I'm sure many of you know as well, when you deal with people who are much, much older and they're trying to get married, it's nearly impossible. Why? Besides career reasons, many of them have a career already, both husband and wife, and they say, look, I'm not changing a thing. They'll both say to each other, look, if you want to get married, you have to move to where I am, because I'm not changing jobs, I'm not changing location, I'm already set. So they've already created their own sense of independence, so they're like, I'm not changing it. Whereas when people are younger and they're still growing, they said, okay, I can, maybe change career paths, or I can do whatever. There's still room to grow there. There's still room to change. For people who are much older, they're like, I'm done. And forget the career path. More so about actual akhlaq and spiritual traits. They're like, I'm not changing anything about myself. How I dress, I'm not changing that. What I eat, the music I listen to, the movies I like, all these things, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. That's it. And that's what people say, and then it becomes very difficult. And then they come to me and they both message me and said, oh, Hassan, we can't find anybody. And we've been looking for years and years and years, and we still can't find anybody. And I said, well, you waited like 20, 30 years. It's going to be very, very difficult. And because you're not budging on any qualities. Who would want somebody that's so stubborn like this? Think from that perspective. And you see many individuals, much later on in life, just end up, there's a lot of people now, Muslims, who are well-intentioned, but they end up just becoming single for the rest of their lives, unfortunately. Or they end up having to settle for, if let's say they're practicing, they end up having to settle for somebody that's not practicing. Or the other way around, somebody who's not practicing ends up marrying somebody that's practicing because the practicing person has to settle. And it just becomes a very difficult marriage. But they had no other choice. They just needed to get married. And of course, the uncles and aunties were annoying everybody by saying, when you're getting married, beta, and all that stuff, right? So they had no choice, right? They had to do all that. So even in the modern world, they're saying, don't even bother with these tests and trials. These things, meaning a family, kids, they're not a source of growth for you. They will stunt your growth. They'll hold you back. Whereas Islam is saying, no, wealth and children they can be ways for you to grow. Now, how does that happen? We'll discuss a few ways. If you can recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One more point related to what's going on right now in the world. Why do you think that it's conservatives that are against abortion more than anybody else? Why are they against it? It's because they say, look, the vast majority, although the talking points on all these sides have to do with, sexual abuse and rape and, what if the mother's life's in danger? They talk about all these extreme cases, which are 1, 2, 5, 10% at most. The overwhelming majority of cases all are what? You can all see the statistics from the liberal pro-abortion websites. They all say it's out of convenience. The vast majority, they say, because it's going to interfere with my college, my education, my career, money, wealth. That's what they're all saying. The vast majority, and a good amount of them are also unmarried people as well. And if you ask, they say, look, I'm not able to be free in how I want to be able to just go out and have a good time. Now, me not being able to get an abortion is messing with that. This is from their own words. So obviously, we can understand why conservatives are going to be against something like this. They said, look, you're taking away one of the greatest blessings of life so that you can have a good time. So the point here then as parents is that when somebody discounts the value of children specifically, what they're doing is they're discounting and diminishing the quality of one of the two greatest tools for ma'rifatun nafs. There are two great tools that are mentioned in the Quran and Hadith
which are tools for self-knowledge, how you come to know yourself and understand yourself, really. Ma'rifatun nafs. The first is when you get married, right, your spouse. Your spouse is somebody who will reflect qualities. You're there with them 24/7. They should be reflecting to you, hey, you're doing this, you need to fix this, get better. And then you do the same thing. That's why these riwayat say a spouse, right, your husband, your wife, is nisfuddin. They're half your deen. Why? You build up half on your own as much as you can, then they will show you what the other half that you're missing. They should help you grow, right? That's the point of marriage. One of the points at least. So they're one of the greatest tools to show you who you really are. The other tools are children. Children will, what as parents we say, they really can, they know how to push our buttons, right? But in a good and bad way. Because they bring us down sometimes to the lowest of the low, right? With our temper and our lack of patience and just, making you want to tear your hair out and all of this. But at the same time, they're the greatest source of joy. And when you see the way that they grow and you see the blessings that are there, and I can't believe that Allah has entrusted us with these amanat. We're watching day by day, they're learning to crawl and walk and move and think. And they're learning all these new cognitive abilities. And now they're, speaking in, small words, and now phrases and sentences. And now they're putting ideas together. And now they're, saying Allah and La ilaha illallah. And they're now expressing Islamic ideas. And they're showing their love for the Ahlul Bayt. This is amazing to be able to watch this and know a child, right? And obviously, every one of us that considers ourselves religious, we want to impart those values on our children. Of course we do. One of the major ways that our children act as a source of examination and test, as a fitna, is not in us whether we teach them religion or not. Yeah, maybe for people who are borderline religious, maybe that's their test. Are you going to teach your kids about Islam or not? For those of us who are like, no, I want to teach my kids Islam, it's not the actual end goal of teaching Islam that's the fitna there. The real fitna is not the ends, but rather the means. How do you and I impart Islamic education and tarbiyah? Nearly every single time when the discussion of tarbiyah comes up, it's not about what information needs to be taught. Of course, they need to know that God is one, prophets, imams, and Ahlul Bayt, Karbala, all of these things. We get that. It's the medium and the type of instruction and the way that the instruction happens. That's usually where our problem is. That's where the real fitna is. And a lot of us feel like the means are more important than the ends. Right? The way that I teach my kids, that has more important than the actual information or the actual end goal of Islam itself. Now let me give some examples. This has to do, in psychology they call this self-image bias. That look, when I grew up, I came to the center because my mom and dad, they forced me to. There was a program, they took me, they said, get dressed, you're coming. They made me sit down. And that program was not in English. It was in whatever, right? For me it was Urdu. And even if I didn't understand, doesn't matter. Sit here and you're going to figure it out. And then a matam's happening, get up and go do matam. And go sit there in the middle. I don't care if you understand, you have to go and do it anyway. And guess what? I want you to be a reciter as well too. So go and recite. And then namaz. Come, stand next to me. Pray. Well, I don't know what I'm saying. Doesn't matter. Come and do this. Wear your hijab like this. Your hair sticking out. Don't do this. You're going to go to hell. And then this is how we were raised. So we do the same thing to our kids. Say, look, that's the way you teach them, right? They have to know what it is. I was taught that way, and this is my favorite line. I was taught like this, and I turned out just fine. Uncle, auntie, let me just tell you, you did not turn out fine. Okay, if nobody's told you that yet, you and me, we are all screwed up. We are all seriously messed up in the head and in the soul. We have serious spiritual trauma and mental issues that we're dealing with. It's not our fault, right? It's not about blame. It's that we're dealing with a lot of stuff. Can you imagine? Our parents, our forefathers, are raised in one society. They've been given a certain type of Islam. They're dealing with different types of issues. This is the kind of one, out of all the nonsense that happened in Ms. Marvel, for those who did watch it, the one sort of okay thing that they did show was the whole issue of the India-Pakistan partition and the trauma that developed from there. But even that, they didn't do a very good job. But anyway, to show that people fled India to go to Pakistan, and that left them with so much trauma, and then they tried to build a nation out of that, clearly a failing nation. And then from there, they're migrating all to the West just for the sake of economics, and they come over here, they're trying to do these basement majalis. Like, this is a mess. And trying to hold on to their Islamic Shia identity like this. And, obviously, our parents, they needed to hear this in Urdu. And then the kids are going up, me, for example, I'm going up and like, okay, where's the English stuff at? Like, no, it doesn't exist. Like, okay, how is this going to work? All I see is some Maulana with a huge belly on the minbar, screaming and yelling. I don't know what he's saying. He's just saying, Saqifa and Khaybar every 10 seconds. I'm like, I don't know what the heck is going on right now, but he seems really angry. And there seems to be 3 guys he's really angry at for some reason. I don't know why. And that's the stuff I just kept hearing. I said, oh, okay, this is Islam. Very interesting. And then afterwards, I'm expected to know all these things. Like, no, that's not how it works. Again, you might say, no, this is the way. This is how we learn, so they have to learn it. Look, just because the way that you got through those means, does not mean that that's the way Islam is supposed to be imparted and taught. We've had many sessions on tarbiyah, so I don't need to give examples. The point here is this. In terms of our ma'rifat al-nafs and us reflecting on our own qualities, in the way that we're teaching our children, we really need to stop and think, is the way that I'm trying to make my kids lovers of the Ahlul Bayt and Allah, trying to make them good Muslimin, mu'mineen, am I doing it in the way that I was taught because that's the way that has to be done and that's it? That's my culture, that's what reigns supreme? Or am I trying to say, no, the Islamic conclusion and goal of love for Allah, love for the deen of Islam, love for the Ahlul Bayt, that's the end goal. The means can change. Whether they like, Matam and Nohe in Urdu and Farsi and Arabic and English, whatever, as long as they express it somehow. Maybe they don't even like poetry. I don't like poetry, for example. I don't like it myself. But maybe they might be a little different. Does it make sense for me to? You can try, you can experiment to see if they like it. But again, what I see so many times is parents saying, I'm trying to get my kids to come and recite. He doesn't want to recite. I said, why are you forcing them to recite? If they don't want to, then why are you forcing them to? Why are you pushing your connection to the Ahlul Bayt is there. Nobody wants to take that away. But why are you automatically thinking that your connection is going to be the exact same connection as your child? It's not going to be the same. Maybe it is, and maybe you want to see that, that's fine. But one of the greatest fitnas, again, the trials for us is to see, are we trying to just make clones of ourselves when we're raising our kids? I just want a little version of me? Or are we trying to make better versions of ourselves? Knowing look, I have a fault in myself. I need to make sure my children doesn't make that same mistake. I know that my parents did the best job they could. I need to make sure I don't repeat the same mistakes that they made. So I have to be cognizant and aware of having a temper in front of my kids, arguing with my spouse in front of my kids, not being empathetic to my kids and understanding what their emotional, spiritual, cognitive abilities are, understanding what the Ahlul Bayt have taught in terms of tarbiyah. And I'll give one example, and I think then I'll end over here before we move on to the Masa'ib. If you can recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We are on the cusp of Muharram, right? It'll be starting, inshallah, next Friday night. And the way that I was raised, which I'm sure is the way that most of you were raised, was that the way that Muharram and the Azadari and everything was taught was, it basically was like Quentin Tarantino was directing it, right? I'll put it that way. It was dark, it's gory, it's bloody, it's harsh. All of these details. The question is this actually beneficial for kids or not? And a lot of people say, how are they going to know what happened in Karbala? So you tell me now, being honest, what is the important part of Karbala? The sacrifice of the Ahlul Bayt, the love that they were expressing, their connection and devotion to Allah, or the fact of lack of water and heat and some of the, again, more gory details? Is that what's really important there? Oh, but they have to know their history. Do you know your history? Be honest for a second, right? Ma'rifat al-nafs. Ask yourself the question, be honest. Have you ever picked up a history book of Karbala? Do you actually know all these details? Mimbar history is not the same as what's there in a historical book. I think all of us hopefully know that by now. We want our kids to know all these details. You say, okay, fine. If you want them to understand all these gory details, let me ask you, do you also allow your kids to play violent video games? Do you allow them to watch horror movies or watch violent movies? Most of you, as parents, will say, no, we don't allow them to do that. Why? Because it's traumatizing. It might lead to nightmares. It might lead to violent, whatever. Like, okay, fine. Why is it now all of a sudden okay to do that for Muharram? Why is all this dark, like Halloween stuff not okay when it comes to movies and games and things like that? But for Muharram, yeah, we can go crazy. Even if it's rated R, it's fine. It seems a little strange, doesn't it? There's nowhere in the Quran or the riwayat which is saying that this is how kids should be instructed in terms of that. In fact, especially if we're talking about kids from 0 to 7, the way that we impart them is love. Do they have love for Bibi Sakina? Love for Ali al-Asghar? Love for Abbas, love for Ali al-Akbar? Do they understand what the sacrifice was, what they were doing? Or are we only concerned with what happened on the battlefield? Like, oh, that was important. And go through all the details, go through the whole fight. No, that's not what's important. So I would humbly advise everybody to really rethink how you want to impart azadari and the Muharram education to your children. Because I know this is something, like, again, trust me, I went through this myself. And again, maybe some of you are thinking, I went through it, I'm not traumatized. Well, trust me, if you and I sat down with a therapist, I'm sure they would unearth a few different things. When I sat down with mine, definitely there was a lot of stuff to talk about. And this is a whole conversation about generational trauma, which maybe we can talk about some other point. So let's just quickly summarize. We brought about these ayat, which talked about children being a fitna. Fitna just means a way that we're tested, the way that we're examined. If you're not prepared, then fitna is a bad thing. If we are prepared, then fitna means that we can grow, we can evolve, we can ascend, which is what we're trying to do. We never pray to be protected and that Allah don't give me a fitna. We say, Allah, get me ready for these fitnas. Allah, give me the strength and the sabr. Allah, give me the wisdom. Allah, don't make me one of those that becomes a dalil and somebody that's moving away from you because of these fitnas. And as Allah mentioned in these ayat, shaitan can be a part of us when we're raising kids. Don't let shaitani temptations when you're disciplining your children. Don't let shaitan come in there. When you're thinking about how to raise them, don't make them dunyawi if you are dunyawi. Make them children who are thinking about the akhirah. Allah said, don't let your children take you away from the remembrance of Allah as well. That the fact that we have Islamic principles here. Even this person, Abu Lubaba, because of the fact that the children melted his heart, it took him away from Islam. It took him away from the remembrance of Allah. We also want to make sure that we are not so sacrificial for our children that we end up sacrificing Islamic principles as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So as we said, there are different understandings of how the sons, Muhammad and Ibrahim, the sons of Muslim ibn Aqil, ended up in the jail in Kufa. Regardless, they say that they were there for about 1 year. And these two young boys, most riwayat say that they weren't even teenagers. They say that they weren't really treated well in this prison. But every day, during the day, they would be fasting. At night, they would stay up reciting their salah, making dua. These are two young boys. Imagine how they were raised to be able to live their life in a jail cell like this. And they say finally one of these guards, when he found out that these kids were from the Ahlul Bayt, because this guard himself, this prison guard, was a follower of the Ahlul Bayt, he secretly released them. These children tried to make their way at night and they got lost. They stayed in a house of this woman who was a supporter, but unfortunately, the male figure that was in the house was a person that was in the army of Ibn Ziyad, la'natullah alayh, and then told Ibn Ziyad about this, wanted to get into the good favors of Ibn Ziyad. So he took the children and he wanted to end their lives and bring his reward to Ibn Ziyad to look better in his books. And when these children now are at the river, and this individual wants to commit this disgusting act, first he orders his slave to do it. And when he orders his slave, and he sees these two children, he said, how can I do something like this? And he refused. And the slave ran away. This person, Harith, he ordered his son. He said, no, I want you to end the lives of these children. And the son also refused. He said, I will never do something like this. And he ran away as well. And now Harith, this evil person himself, said, fine, then I'll go ahead and do it. These two young boys, Muhammad and Ibrahim, said, before you end our lives, please, would you at least give us time just so that we can pray to Allah one more time? Can you imagine? The last request of these two young children is that they want to pray to Allah. He said, fine, go ahead. And these two young children pray to Allah for the last time. Harith ends their life. When he comes back, he brings the reward to Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad says, what have you done? How could you do something like this without my permission? And he executes Harith himself. But perhaps the most difficult thing of all was the night before Harith had actually brought these two sons to end their lives. When these two sons, when Muhammad and Ibrahim were together in those final nights, Both Muhammad and Ibrahim, on those nights, they were feeling very anxious. They weren't sure what was going to happen to them when they were staying in this house with this nice woman. They weren't sure what they were able to do and what was going to happen in their future. So the young one, he tells to his older brother, he says, Bhaiya, he says, I'm feeling a little scared tonight. I don't know what's going to happen. He said, can I sleep a bit closer to you tonight? Is it okay if I can hug you while I sleep tonight so that I feel a bit safer there? This is the way that these two brothers were acting to one another. Brothers were acting as protectors to one another. Now we look into the same way in Karbala, when we look at Aad and Muhammad, in the same way that they were trained by Abbas and Hussein, when they were out in the battlefield as well, they were looking out and told to defend one another. When somebody would come at Muhammad, Aad would defend him from the back. When somebody would come at Aad, Muhammad would come around him and defend him. But you see that these two boys had lost their lives in the same way as well. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد.
موئے جب دونوں دریا پر محمد اور ابراہیم موئے جب دونوں دریا پر محمد اور ابراہیم یہی کہتے رو رو کر محمد اور ابراہیم موئے جب دونوں دریا پر سب کہیو یہ امو سے کہ ہم تیرے ہوئے فدیے کٹاتے دونوں ہے ہم سر محمد اور ابراہیم موئے جب دونوں دریا پر ہماری لو خبر جلدی کہ ہے ہم خلد کو راہی ہماری لو خبر جلدی کہ ہے ہم خلد کو راہی خرے ہم دونوں ہے مزتر محمد اور ابراہیم موئے جب دونوں دریا پر ہمارے باپ کو مارا کیا ہے ہم کو آوارہ ہمارے باپ کو مارا کیا ہے ہم کو آوارہ پھر ہم بت کے جو در در محمد اور ابراہیم موئے جب دونوں دریا پر حسین الغریب الغریب الحسین شہید 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 الحسین حسین الغریب الغریب الحسین شہید سلام ہو تمہیں اے شہ کربلا سلام ہو تمہیں اے قتیل جفا سلام ہو تمہیں ہے شہ کربلا سلام ہو تمہیں اے قتیل جفا سلام ہو تمہیں دین کے پیشوا شہید 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 الحسین حسین الغریب شہید الحسین کٹا کے گلا تم نے ثابت کیا بلا یہ دن تم نے ثابت کیا کہ تم جانشین رسول خدا شہید 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 الحسین حسین الغریب الغریب شہید شہید تمہیں نے برایا ہے دین خدا تمہیں ہو ہمارے امام خدا تمہیں ہو تو شافی روز جزا شہید 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 الحسین حسین الغریب الغریب الحسین شہید ہمیں کربلا میں بلاؤ حسین ہمیں اپنا روزہ دکھاؤ حسین بنے ہم انبیاء کے زوار حسین شہید 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 الحسین حسین الغریب الغریب الحسین شہید 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 الحسین الفاتحہ
السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ السلام علیکم یا امیر المؤمنین السلام علیکم یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدۃ النساء العالمین السلام علیکم یا امام حسن امام حسین سید الشباب اہل جنہ السلام علیکم یا مولا ابو الفضل عباس ابن امیر المؤمنین وقاسم الحسن ومسلم ابن عقیل وانی ابن حروہ وحابی ابن مزائی اور شہید الریاحی السلام علیکم سادات جمیعاً ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ السلام علیکم مولا وابن مولا السلام علیکم یا غریب الغربا السلام علیکم عین الضعفاء والفقراء السلطان ابو الحسن علی ابن موسى الرضا کن شفیعنا و شفیع والدینا فی یوم الجزاء ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ السلام علیکم ائمۃ المسلمین علی ابن الحسین محمد ابن علی و جعفر ابن محمد موسیٰ ابن جعفر علی ابن موسیٰ محمد ابن علی وعلی ابن محمد والحسن ابن علی والحسین ابن علی السلام علیکم یا صاحب العصر والزمان الامان الامان السلام علیکم یا امام الانس والجان السلام علیکم یا اہل بیت النبوہ جمیعاً رحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ اللہم کل ولیک الحجۃ ابن الحسن صلواتک علیہ وعلی آبائہ فی ہذہ الساعۃ وفی کل ساعہ ولیاً وحافظاً وقائداً وناصراً ودلیلاً وحینا حتی تسکنہ ارضک طوعا وتمتعہ فیہا طویلا برحمتک یا ارحم الراحمین.